Southside family, and those of you who may be watching our videos as well who may not be a part of Southside, we wanted to provide you tonight with a little bit of encouragement. We know that we all need this right now in this day and time, and we wanted to provide a little bit of encouragement for you tonight as you are in the middle of your week, and who knows what you're facing, what you're dealing with in your job or in your family life, or different things that may be going on. And so I wanted us to look tonight at John chapter 10. In John 10, Jesus is referring to himself as the Good Shepherd. And as a part of that discussion, Jesus places himself alongside of the thief as a way of showing how they are opposites. And in verse 10 of John chapter 10, Jesus says about the thief, he only comes to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Now, a lot's been said, a lot has been written about what exactly that means. And I think there are a lot of things that we could say about that abundant life that Jesus gives us. And there are so many different parts of this life in Christ that makes this life abundant. But I kind of want to approach that from a different angle tonight. I really want us to consider the opposite. I want us to talk tonight about the absurd life. What would life be without Jesus? What would life be really without God? To help us in that study, I'm going to be drawing some from the writings of William Lane Craig. He wrote a book called Reasonable Faith, and it is a book focused primarily on Christian apologetics. And William Lane Craig, one of his chapters is called The Absurdity of Life Without God. If you're watching tonight and you believe in God, then I imagine you have at some point dealt with someone who thinks you're crazy, who just flat out thinks that anyone who believes that there is a divine being who created all of this, that they just think that's absurd, that it just makes no sense. There's no logical reason for anyone to believe in something like that. And so you may have had people who roll their eyes when they see that you have a Bible, or when they see that you stop to pray before a meal, or maybe you've even been challenged by some of these people who try to get you to prove to them that God actually exists. They would say that the idea of an abundant life that is in Jesus makes no sense. What I want us to do tonight is I want us to talk about how absurd life actually is without God. And I think this is a really good place for any of us to start a conversation with someone who doesn't believe in God, because rather than trying to present them with a series of proofs in our mind that God exists, it really places the emphasis on their position, on the atheist's standing and the shaky ground that they actually stand on. And once we help them see how inconsistent it often is, then I think what we can do is then have the opportunity to begin talking about this abundant life that Jesus refers to in John chapter 10. So, here's what we need to consider. Before we really are going to try and prove that God does exist, we need to ask this question: what is the meaning of life? Now that sounds kind of heavy, right? And for a lot of people, it's just too much. Trying to answer a question that profound is just too much to grapple with. And so many of us, instead of dealing with that question honestly, many choose just to ignore it. And instead of investing in answering the question of the meaning of life, so many instead involve themselves in all manner of escapisms like entertainment or hobbies or lavish lifestyles, possessions, and things like that. Well, Blaise Pascal, the 17th century mathematician, wrote about the mindset of a person who refuses to acknowledge the importance of this question. Someone who just doesn't want to think about the purpose or meaning of life. And listen to what he wrote. I see the terrifying immensity of the universe which surrounds me and find myself limited to one corner of this vast expanse without knowing why I am set down here rather than elsewhere, nor why the brief period appointed for my life is assigned to me at this moment rather than another in all the eternity that has gone before and will come after me. Here's the point. Avoiding the question of the meaning of life is absurd. If God does not exist, then life has no meaning. Life has no value. It has no purpose. Think about it this way. If there is no God, then this entire universe is nothing more than a happy accident, right? And if that is true, then none of us were created intentionally, which means there is no purpose for our existence. And that's kind of depressing, isn't it? But it gets worse. Because if there is no God who created this universe, and we are nothing more than happy accidents, then we also have to acknowledge the fact that there is absolutely no standard for morality. There is nothing that is right. There's nothing that is wrong. There's nothing that is good. There's nothing that is bad. Interestingly, the Russian author Dostoevsky, in two of his novels, demonstrates that if God does not exist, we are left with complete and total moral relativity. So no action that anyone ever takes, no matter how deplorable it is, no matter how dreadful it is, no action could ever be condemned by an atheist. And in these two novels, which, by the way, are Crime and Punishment and the Brothers Karamazov, here in these novels we find that living life consistently with this point of view, that morality is completely relative, living that kind of life is impossible. And it's absurd to try. Now, those who want to uphold their view that God is not real, they will point to evolution and they will say, well, we have evolved to the point that we understand better what is good or bad or right or wrong. But here's the problem with that. Without God in the picture at all, we have no objective reason for explaining why any action is right or wrong. It's either right or wrong just because it's an accidental part of evolution or because it is a social convention. If that's all we have to go on, if God doesn't exist, if that's our two options, then there's a big problem. Because evolution actually teaches survival of the fittest as the normal course of things. And that's not exactly morality. Instead, it's really more, if I am stronger than you, then I should be allowed to force you to do whatever I want. And that's not more morality. And if social convention is the way to go here, social conventions are actually nothing more than just what's popular or unpopular at a particular place and time. If that is our standard for morality, then the racism, cruelty, and genocide that has occurred in the past, even the recent past, is not something we could ever condemn, because that's just what was acceptable in that society at that place and that time. Obviously, that would be absurd. And that's what life without God is. But it gets even worse. If God does not exist, and we have no meaning or purpose in life, then there's no standard for good or evil, then there's a big problem when it comes to the end of this life. Pascal dealt with this too, and he said, "As I know not whence I come, so I know not whither I go. I only know that on leaving this world, I fall forever into nothingness or into the hands of a wrathful God." So here's the question. If we just all pass into nothingness, or we all just cease to exist, then why should any of us care what kind of life we live? Consider this. There are two different ways of going about living this life, right? One is a life that does a lot of good for other people. A life that is invested in feeding the hungry, in helping the poor, or giving of themselves in such a way that is a blessing to the lives of others. Okay, that's option number one. Option number two is the completely and totally self-indulgent, selfish way of going about life. A life that is going to be cruel in seeking out self-satisfaction, regardless of who they have to harm to get what they want. If both of these kinds of lives simply end in the cessation of existence, then what is the motivation for any of us to be more than just selfish? Why not steal, kill, and destroy to get what I want out of life? Well, once again, this is absurd. This is the absurd life. This is the life that has no meaning, no purpose, a life without a moral compass, a life without God. In order to be consistent as an atheist, life is full of despair and misery. But as Jesus says here in John chapter 10, He came that we may have an abundant life. And that abundant life is a life that is willing to acknowledge humanity's shortcomings. Yes, there is absolutely evil in this world. Yes, we fail at our attempts to do what's right, to do good. But it's also a life that acknowledges the glory of God. It's a life that is a life of hope. It's a life of joy. It is a life that has meaning and it has purpose. So the next time that you are faced with someone who thinks that your faith is absurd, remember John chapter 10. Remember what Jesus says here about the abundant life that you can have in Him. And perhaps you can have a conversation with such a person about how absurd life actually is when God's not in the picture. I hope that you can take this knowledge and take what we have learned together tonight and use it to grow in your faith. And I look forward to the next time that we are able to see each other, and I hope that you have a blessed week. Take care.